I think something has to change. Like, I think that's what it comes down to. Like, you cannot continue doing what you're doing and expect to win any games of significance going forward. Period. We are back and better than ever for another edition of the Starting 502 podcast, brought to you by Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon, coming to you live from the Kearns Corner Studios. As always, Press Meyer, Jake Hook alongside. Follow us on the Twitter. Follow us on the X at Press Meyer, at U of L _updates, and of course on the mothership at the State of Lou. Jake, how we doing, man?
I'm all right. I was happier 24 hours ago, when we're up 10, up 14 against Duke, but I'm doing all right. I at least like some things. I was kind of afraid we were going to be lifeless after what we saw against Ole Miss, losing by 20 plus. So I was at least happy to see this team still has fight in this. Hopefully this season is not just lost after losing so many people to injury.
I mean, there's runs, right, with this team that we didn't see under Kenny Payne.
Mm-hmm.
Or like in the end of the Chris Mack era, right? Like, I think that there are, I mean, and just jumping right into it, right? Like, I think that there are so many moments already with this team under Pat Kelsey where you see the promise with this team, you see the vision that which the recruiting or the coaching staff recruited this team with, right? Like, you see what they were thinking, you see the thought process, and to me, man, like I still have a lot of hope for this team, and I think that's where we should probably start. Like, I think tonight we should start with just the positives, right? Because it's really easy to look on the outside and look at, okay, well, Louisville lost at the last second to Oklahoma in Atlantis, then they come home and get kind of dog walked by Mississippi, like, just call it how it is, and then played a really solid first half, and then things just kind of got away from them in the second half against Duke. And we'll get into a number of reasons why that is. But when you look across Louisville's schedule so far, currently Tennessee's the number one team in the country, right? Like, and they looked like it against Louisville. They've looked like the number one team in the country every time that they've set foot on the floor this year. Um, Oklahoma is now 13th in the country. Mississippi is now 19th in the country. And who am I missing?
Duke.
Duke is 7th, 9th? Can't remember. No, 5th. Duke is 5th, right? Am I missing that? I wrote those down earlier so I can remember it, but now I can't remember. So we'll have to look into that, Jake.
I was about to say, I have not looked at the most recent AP poll.
Regardless, basically you have your losses are to two top 10 teams and two other top 20 teams. Oklahoma, making their way up to 13th in the country, obviously a very promising team. 3 losses to 3 teams that will compete for the top of the SEC. And upcoming, you have let's just put it out there, Jake. You have probably the favorite in the SEC at this point. If not the favorite, the second favorite, right, in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
So really a daunting schedule going into in the non-conference, as we thought that it may be. But I think it's been seeing the results from Louisville's opponents against other teams. It's really hit home how quality of a schedule this has been, and how terrible the timing of Louisville's injuries has been. So I think that's where you have to start, right? Like, you played 7 guys against Duke and kind of went toe to toe with them for 32 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there was still a lot of hope at the under 8 timeout that Louisville could still, rally and pull it out, right? So I don't know, thoughts on, you're 5-4 at this point in the season. I think that we said going into the season that was kind of the expectation. Like, if you're at 6-3 at this point, you're sitting really good. You're at 5-4 with a win over an Indiana squad that seems to be improving a little bit, a decisive victory over Indiana, and a really, really good win over West Virginia. So that's where you sit with some really, really terrible injuries on this roster. So I mean, if you're looking back at what the expectations were going into the season, I mean, in your opinion, where do you think Louisville is compared to where we expected them to be?
Yeah, I think I was whenever we talked about it before the season started. I think I was hoping for 6-3 up until this point, assuming a loss to Duke, assuming a loss in Atlantis, and then one other somewhere else. And for the most part, that is what's happened. And then assuming a loss to Tennessee. So for the most part, that is what has happened. And then I think if you look back and you know the knowledge of you're going to miss 3 of your top 7 players, top 8 players, I can't be anything but happy with 5-4. Um, and I know we lost, and I know we lost by 11, and that second half was rough. But I liked what I saw. We had some guys. Roman and I talked about it. Guys had to step up, and some guys did step up and play pretty decently well in that Duke game. And we're going to have them play well if we want to be competitive in the ACC for the remainder of the year.
Yeah, I mean, look, you still have a solid core to this team, and that's what I want to hit home with that a little bit, right? Like the starters are really damn good. Like your starting five up against anybody in the ACC is very, very competitive. Like regardless of thoughts about individual play or what we need to get, what we do or do not need to get out of a specific player or out of this team as a whole. I think that you have a really competitive starting five. I think that you have absolute gem in Kanai Roots. I think that I can't hit that home enough. That guy is fantastic. I think that you have a quality starting center who I think should probably continue to start and see more time if he can, and James Scott. I think that you have a top 2 or 3 point guard in the ACC and Chucky Hepburn. I think that you have solid pieces around them. You know, I think there's a few guys that need to step up. I think that Javon Hadley has played pretty much exactly to what we've expected so far. I think that Rain Smith's been in some aspects of the game a lot more advanced than we expected in other facets. You know, I think Louisville should expect him to step up a little bit more. But overall, I mean, look, at the end of the day, we sit almost exactly where we expected Louisville to sit heading into an important week this week against UTEP and Kentucky before you really get into the meat of conference play. So with all that in mind, I mean, to you, what jumps out? You know, let's talk positives first, right? Like what jumps out? What jumps off the page to you as something that's really positive that this team can hang its hat on at this point in the season?
I think, I mean, at least just after this last game against Duke, Kanai Ruth's stepping up even more. We've seen it in little spurts, and you cannot question that man's aggressiveness. You cannot question that man's attitude, his confidence, anything. You can question whether or not he has an A button on his controller, because I don't really ever see him pass that often. But
Right.
I really liked seeing him and against Duke at 10 points, 6 boards in only 18 minutes. Was probably our second best player of the game and best player in multiple stretches of that game. Super aggressive, rebounded well, was one of our better defenders as well. He's still out of control. He's still raw. He still needs to catch up to the speed of the game, but I think there is so much there. And I think it's clear to me, it's clear to you as well. We were talking before that I think we probably need to see his minutes switch with Noah Waterman's.
Mhm.
If Noah's not hitting threes like he has not been able to all season long, he is a defensive liability. He is turning the ball over too much. He is not shooting free throws well. He's not really doing a whole lot of anything at this moment. So I'm hoping to see Kanai Ruth's playing at least 20 minutes a night, if not more, as this season progresses.
Yeah, I mean, when you look across this roster, right, I think that there's some places where you could see them improving, right? Like you could stand to see some improvement from certain guys. I think that a huge positive that I'm taking away from the first 9 games of the season. I mean, we're basically a quarter of the way through the season, right? I think a huge positive that you can take away is that when this team gets hot, they're very, very difficult to stop on both ends of the floor. They've moved their way up to 30th in Ken Palm defensive efficiency, and given the what's the word I'm looking for here? Given the attrition across this roster, basically losing 3 of your top 6 or 7 players, probably all 3 for the season, right? Without those guys, the fact that you've been able to defend at such a high level just speaks to the amount of buy-in with this coaching staff, right? Like you really locked down Duke for probably the first 25 minutes of that game.
Mm-hmm.
And that stands out to me. Like that's fantastic. And I think that the defense has led to solid offensive possessions. And I think the other thing too that stands out to me, we really called out the rebounding in the first 3 games of the season and the free throw shooting and said, those are two things that stand out that those are things you can fix, pretty quickly. It's not rocket science, right? Like you can fix effort on rebounding and you can fix free throw shooting. Like they're free, right? Like those are two things you can correct. And for the most part, they've corrected course. I think that you're seeing a little bit of a regression to the mean, right? With Louisville's 3-point shooting. You now have Rain Smith. If you just had to guess, how many threes do you think he's attempted in 9 games?
Oh, good Lord. 55.
81.
Jesus Christ. Wow.
81 3-point attempts from Rain Smith. But he is shooting 38% from beyond the arc. So, I mean, as much as it is a bit maddening sometimes, right? Because he might go out there and miss his first 4 or 5 shots, and he will take the 6 with the same blind confidence that he took the first 5. But once he starts hitting them, it's on, right? Like once he's got that feel for it, he's taking those shots. Now, by the same token, you have no Waterman has attempted 43 threes, right? So like you were thinking like Rain Smith, who is a very, very high volume shooter, had taken in the 50s. No Waterman's almost to that point. He's 10 for 43 on the season. And I think 4 of those threes came in one game.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you look at Terrence Edwards improving a little bit, 10 for 38 from 3-point range. Chucky Hepburn, 14 for 42. That puts him at 33% on the season. So overall, I think you're seeing a little bit of a regression towards the mean, if you will. And I think this team will continue to shoot better as the season goes along and as they learn, each other's spots, as they learn, what shots the other guy on the team will take and make, right? So, one, I'm trying to think of just other pauses before we get into what I can feel I feel should potentially be corrected, right? But I think one thing that you're seeing is a high number of possessions leads to potentially a high number of points and in some cases blowouts, right? Like you speed up Indiana for the entire game. You dictate the pace of that entire game. And it's a high scoring game where you just absolutely blow them out from start to finish. Started to see some of that against Duke, right? Like you get up to a 10-3 lead, you get out to a 14-point lead in the first half. And then you start to see regression towards the mean in the other way, right? Like where you see when shots aren't falling, what happens? Who do you go to? And I think what we've learned is that if it's not Chucky Hepburn, I'm not sure who it's going to be, right? And I think that that's where you start to get into some of the concerns. You're going 7 deep right now, which we can get into this in a second, but I don't know why you can't get a single minute out of Frank Anselm eBay. Like Frank is not
Is he
that bad.
is he hurt? I for some reason I thought I read somewhere on Twitter that he might have been hurt this last game, but I don't know if there was any. I didn't see anything from like Matt McGavick or like a reliable source saying he was hurt.
Last night he looked like he was dressed and ready to go. So I mean
Yeah,
he was sitting on the bench without his warm-ups on for the entire game, ready to go in. So and
I mean,
I
yeah,
kept looking at my wife like, "Uh, are we just going to keep riding with Waterman? Like is that we're just going to keep pushing this down the road and not put in Frank at all?" Now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he was hurt, and if he was, I apologize. But I don't know. At this point, I'm not sure that Noah Waterman is doing what you brought him here to do.
certainly not.
And I think that that's a huge blemish on this roster at this point. And I don't mean to, it's not in a belittling way. It's not in a way that, I mean, people have bad stretches in their career. Like nobody's immune to that. But there are certain things you can control. You can control, defensive effort. You can control, um, your discipline and knowledge overall of the scheme and the system. You can control, putting a body on somebody to get a board. And look, when you're one of only two 6'11" bodies that this team has on the team now, right? I mean, it's what James Scott and Noah Waterman are 6'10", 6'11". Those are your bigs. Like, and if you're not going to play Frank Anselmibe, you have to get Noah Waterman. You got to go out there and get me 10 rebounds every single night. Period. That should be your job at this point. And I think that you brought him in to play the role that he did at BYU last year, right? Which is he can be a risk taker. But he is a solid shooter. He can stretch the floor, and he does all the hustle things that you want to see, right? Like he grabs loose rebounds. He's diving on the floor for loose balls. He's creating steals, extra possessions, getting blocks, and we've seen that at times. But I mean, against Duke, it was an eyesore. The fact that Connie Roos comes in, Kenai Roos comes in and plays 7 really quality minutes in the first half, and then we're still trying to ride the Noah Waterman train. That was really frustrating and disheartening to see because at this point, and I'm not saying that it's going to continue like this, but at this point, Noah Waterman is not providing what you brought him here to provide. He's not. He's floating out on the perimeter. He's taking shots that he probably shouldn't take. And one game they were falling. Against Indiana, those shots were falling, and that's it. Outside of that, it's been a lot of poor shooting. It's been not a lot of getting to the foul line, drawing a bunch of fouls, not solid, consistent defensive effort, not crashing the boards at the rate that needs to be, not having awareness on defense, right? Like we posted that, and it's made the rounds a little bit. The video of Chucky Hepburn on one singular defensive possession, guarding 5 different guys, getting his hands on the ball multiple times, going all over the floor. The thing that's lost in that play is that Noah Waterman's like, what the fuck do I do? Like he's just like sliding out of the way and letting the 6'2", 6'3" point guard take control on defense. And in situations like that, yeah, it's great to see. I mean, Chucky is an elite defender, a fantastic defender. But I think if I could pinpoint one player that I have to see more out of, you got to see more, or what happened against Duke and what's happened in the last 3 games really will continue. Like you will struggle with UTEP if you cannot get consistent play out of no water. Like you have 7 guys on this roster. You only have, really 2.5 true big men, right? And Noah Waterman is a 6-year senior. You got to see more out of that guy. You got to see more out of him. And if you don't, I don't know, unless he is hurt, I don't know what the hesitancy to put in Frank Anselmibe is because he can't be worse. You can't be worse than that on defense. And again, Noah, I'm sorry, but like what you provided the last couple of years at BYU is not what we're getting at Louisville. And this is in a moment where you have to see him step up.
Yeah, I still think Noah is a good shooter. I know he is not shooting well right now, but I do think he is still a good shooter. And just like we've said all year long, this team is a good shooting team. I want them to continue shooting. I still want him to continue shooting. Maybe not, 5 threes a game or whatever he is. What'd you say? He's shot 44 threes?
43 threes. Yeah.
Yeah. So right under 5 threes a game.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe not that, and I think maybe just has to have an understanding that like his role is different from what we expected it to be at the beginning of the year when we thought we had Kaysen, when maybe we thought we'd get a little more from Frank, thought we might get a little bit more from James. Like he does need to be this team's big man. He needs to be more of an interior presence. He needs to rebound better. He has to stop with the stupid turnovers 2-3 different times. Just the dumbest turnovers where he hit Cooper Flagg in the face when Chucky was pushing the ball in transition, when he gets a stop on Cooper Flagg and then just passes the ball right back to him and then fouls him, gives up an and 1. And we're only up by 4 at that point now after being up 10, like 30 seconds before that. So I think he's going to have to realize that his role has shifted a little bit and hopefully step into that. And I think if Noah shoots at a 35, 40% clip like he has for most of his career, we can forgive the lapses on defense at times. Right. We can forgive the, oh, dang, he gave up an offensive rebound because he's a positive on offense. But right now, with him not being able to do the biggest thing that he was supposed to be able to do, it's been a struggle. And if it continues to struggle, we at least have hope with Kenai. I don't think Frank Anselmibe is the answer. I do think that if Noah's going to play like that, then he does deserve to get 4 or 5 minutes because he is a better rebounder. He is a better interior defender. Offensively, he is not really much at all. But yeah, if Noah's going to play like that, then I think that we either need to see more Kanai or we need to see a little bit of Frank, just something different.
Yeah, I mean, and here's what it comes down to me as well. In the low post, right? So with Kaysen Pryor and Frank Anselmibe aside, because Kaysen Pryor's out for the season, it doesn't look like Frank's going to see a ton of PT for whatever reason, right? So you're really looking at two primary guys that can be a low post player. All right. So you have James Scott and you have Noah Waterman. James Scott has attempted 28 shots this year, and outside of one weird three, right? 25 for 28, good for 89% from the field, number one in the country in two-point field goal shots. You have to, you have to get the ball to him more often. You have to, like, point blank period. You have to get James Scott the ball more often in the low post. I don't know what that consists of. I don't know how you facilitate your offense in that way. And look, James Scott isn't going to be a guy that you're just getting it to him and he's just going to back a guy down and have like a running jump hook or something. And maybe that comes later on in his career. But when you look at the two guys that are your low post options, you have Noah Waterman, James Scott. James Scott shooting 89% down low. Noah Waterman has attempted 43 threes and only 18 twos this season. All right. He's hit 11 of those 2-point field goals, good for 61% inside the arc. He's only hit 10 of those 43 3-point shots. To me, that says that that's a guy that, while it might not be his game, it might not be exactly what he was brought here to do, he has to become that guy, right? Because at this point, Noah, you're 10 for 43 from beyond the arc, and you were 3 for 11 from the free throw line. Like that's not okay. That's not like Louisville's gonna go nowhere in this conference in this season, regardless of what's happened with the roster attrition, and we can get into that as well. This is where you're needed. This is, you were brought here to be a significant contributor on this team. You're a starter on this team. It's got to be better. It's got to be better, or you got to, you need to learn to live with James Scott's lack of stretching the floor, right? Like it's one or the other. And like I look forward to, and we'll get into the Kentucky game, but like I look forward to the Kentucky game, and I see like a team that has a very threatening low post presence, right? And you have to have somebody that's going to be able to defend that. You have to have somebody that's going to be able to step up and meet the challenge. And to me, like that makes me cringe because like right now I'm looking at this and I'm saying like if things don't fall exactly Louisville's way, like this can be a 20 to 25-point loss again in a very, very, very important rivalry game. It's not acceptable in the next, we're talking here on Monday night. In the next 5 days, Louisville has to figure out how to adjust for that. Period. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, that to me, that's the major concern. There are plenty of other pieces on this roster. There's plenty of strengths, but I think to me, that is the glaring concern. I think you've seen signs of solid defense from Noah Waterman. You've seen signs of great defense from James Scott, but you have to be able to put that together for a full 40 minutes. And the staff has a real challenge ahead trying to figure out what that looks like. Like even when you bring Kadir Traore back, he's only 6'5". He can only do so much in the low post. What you have is what you have down low. And you have to figure out how to make that work. Like there's no other option. You have to figure that out or you will not be a 500 team this season. 100%. And so to me, as good as some of these pieces are, as good and as promising as a guy like Kenai Roos is, as consistent as a guy like Javon Hadley is, or as exciting as a guy like Rain Smith is, or as bewildering as a guy like Chucky Hepburn is. Those are all great pieces. But if you can't put it together down low, you're not going to be able to sustain for 40 minutes against anybody on the schedule. You will struggle against UTEP if you play that way down low down the stretch. Period. Like that is a major, major, massive concern to me. So I mean, in your opinion, I mean, how do you correct that? Like, what's the correction course. How do you get things back on track if you're only playing a 7-man rotation?
I don't know if it is correctable because I don't think Pat Kelsey wants to change his style. I know he
Sure.
wants to shoot. I know he wants to play at a fast pace, and I think that's hurting us towards the ends of games, as we saw against Duke.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's like we said, Noah Waterman stepping up, James Scott becoming more involved in this offense. I mean, have we seen a singular play where James Scott has posted somebody up
No.
and done a
No.
post move? I mean, maybe it's not in his bag. Maybe there is a
Right.
reason why the coaches are not showing it. And what sucks too is our perimeter defense has been so good. We at times will get beat 1-on-1, but I think the biggest issue at times is defense, and especially in that last 10 minutes of the game, is that Duke was just able to go 1-on-1 so often, and there was no interior post help. It's what we saw
Zero answer.
a ton against Ole Miss. It felt like it was just layup lines, one-on-one layup lines against Ole Miss, and then we saw it towards the back half of the second half against Duke. So we've got to have a better post presence there. And James Scott can be that. Noah Waterman can block shots at times. I think it's more of a positioning thing. Like you literally just don't have a big man there ready to affect or block a shot. It's just a straight line drive.
Yeah.
So I
I mean,
don't.
maybe the answer is you pack it in more defensively. Maybe you zone more. Like I think there has to be a pivot at this point in the season. Like if Frank Anselmibe isn't an option, which it is befuddling to me that you can't get a guy that's played 6 years that is a Power Five. He's only played at the Power Five level his entire career. That is 6'11", relatively skilled. Like the fact that he can only get garbage minutes and plays 0 minutes against Duke, like that's befuddling to me. Like you brought him here for this instance, Jake. Like you
Mhm.
brought him here in case, God forbid, Case and Pryor gets hurt. God forbid, Kadir Traore gets hurt. God forbid, like all of these things that you were preparing against, have happened now. And so I don't understand why we can't get this guy 5 minutes in a game.
From
It's
what I've seen of Frank, I think he does deserve, like we said, especially if Noah's going to play this poorly, a few minutes. He's not the answer though. Like
mm-mm.
the answer long term is not 5 extra minutes from Frank Anselmibe. The answer is Noah Waterman playing like he needs to, Kenai
Sure.
Ruth stepping up, Abubakar Traore coming in and making a difference whenever he's able to come back. Hopefully in the next month or so. One thing I did want to say, we're focusing on positive. Bring it back just a little bit to
Yeah,
positive.
yeah, let's do it.
Uh, Terrence Edwards did finally have a solid game against a
Mhm.
major, like a high level team, not just against
Right,
one of the bottom
right.
teams that we play. So I thought that was good. He seemed more confident, and I think that all stems from him actually hitting 3-point shots. So that was
Yeah.
good. He still does not really get past guys like I thought he'd be able to, and has to shoot and make a lot of difficult shots in the paint. But a lot of those shots were falling. I guess he just doesn't have the speed to get past guys, and at times he gets sped up at this level and has 3-4 dumb ass turnovers a game. But if you can get Terrence Edwards scoring back up to 15, 16, 18 points a game, this team can be competitive in the ACC. We can still be a potential tournament team. So hopefully that wasn't a one-off. Hopefully the shooting stays, his confidence remains, and he's able to be a guy who can score for us. Because right now, outside of Chucky Hepburn getting into the paint and kicking out to dudes, and Rain Smith hitting threes, and Javon Hadley getting offensive rebounds, like
Right.
I don't really know where this offense comes from. So Terrence Edwards has to continue to play well.
Yeah, Terrence Edwards has to be an initiator, right? Like he can't just be something that's a result of the pieces around him. He needs to influence those around him. And I think Edwards Fat played okay against Duke. Like I don't want to, it's an improvement from his performances against most of the quality power four opponents that Louisville's faced so far. However, I think the main concern for me with Edwards is just the fact that he's not a. I really don't see him as a viable backup for Chucky Hepburn, and that's what he's had to be in the absence of Corin Johnson. Like you need him to be more of an initiator of the offense than he is. And I think that teams are just licking their chops whenever Hadley goes out. They are, whenever Hadley goes out, it's just it's just a different world with Terrence Edwards running the show, right? Like it's just he's not an initiator of this offense. I don't know if that means that more of the offensive initiation needs to come from, you know, Brain Smith. Like, uh, who is it? Javon Hadley. Like there, it needs to be a bit more of a team effort, in my opinion, because I think that Terrence Edwards is best off the ball. I think that he's a guy that you need to kind of set some plays for him to get a back cut or to, post up somebody one on one like you have been with Javon Hadley. Or there's a number of ways that you can get this guy going in the offense. I don't think that, like you say, Jake, I don't think he's a guy, he's not the straw that stirs the drink. And that's what Louisville's kind of expecting him to be when when Chucky Hepburn goes out. And I think that you need to see, we got to get back to where Chucky's only playing 32, 34 minutes max. Like 37 minutes is just not. I don't think that's a viable solution.
I just
Like
don't
I
know if
think,
we can.
yeah,
I know we want to, but I don't know if we can. Like in those minutes when Chucky came out, sometime in the second half, Duke went on like a 4-6-0 run. I think he was
hmm
out for a minute max, and immediately he's back in the scores table, checking back in. Like I just don't know if I don't know if Coach Kelsey can, because he's our best perimeter defender. He's our best defender. He's our best perimeter defender. He's the only dude who can initiate offense at this point. Like I know ideally we don't want to play him 37 minutes because he's going to get tired. He's not going to shoot as well.
hmm
He's going to make more. He's going to have more turnovers, which he did have a few uncharacteristic turnovers in that Duke game. But I don't know if Pat Kelsey feels like he can.
I think so. Right. Like I think something has to change. Like I think that's what it comes down to. Like you cannot continue doing what you're doing and expect to win any games of significance going forward. Period. And so what is that? It could be a number of things, right? It could be finding another solution at point guard and at center. And that doesn't mean, right, like you don't have any very many options on that bench. Like you're not going to bring a walk on in. You're not going to do something crazy off the wall, unconventional. So that means, point guard by committee, of center by committee, right? Like that's how this team was recruited in the first place. I think that the idea of Chucky Hepburn defending like he does, and then asking him to also run the offense on the other end of the floor, yeah, against like some Joe Schmo, yeah, that probably will work. Against Kentucky, that's not going to work. Against Duke, that's not going to work, right? Like that's just the reality of the situation. And so I think Jake, you said, you don't think that Kelsey's going to change his ways, but I think that unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures. And
Mm-hmm.
look, the pace that they are playing at, especially for instance, I think the Duke game is a perfect example, right? The pace in the first half was great if you have somebody coming in to spare these guys for a few minutes, right? And you don't. Like you cannot, like there's nobody sitting there on that bench that's going to come in and spare them. So with that in mind, I think it's got to slow down just a touch. And I understand that's not something that happens overnight. You don't go the entire off season, go to the Bahamas, come back and play exhibition games, and then get into into the start of the schedule, just saying go 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 nonstop all the time, and then all of a sudden say, okay, no, we're going to slow this down, because I think that also takes away some of the strengths of the team as well. But they have to find ways to be able to get a breath in whatever capacity that is, right? Like is it, real serious clock management where, before, three before three of the four timeouts you bring Chucky Hepburn out of the game. Like that's not something you can consistently do though, right? Like you can't, like they tried that with Chucky against Duke. They try to bring him out on the front end of a TV timeout and then try to leave him out after the TV timeout. And then the problem is you don't know if that's going to be 10 seconds or 10 minutes. You
Mm-hmm.
don't know. And so I'm not sure that that's necessarily the solution. I think that there needs to be a concerted effort to slow the pace and slow the number of possessions, because number one, it's not helping, right? Like there is a direct correlation between the pace that Louisville's playing and the number of turnovers that they are giving up. And then on the other end, right, there's a correlation between the number of turnovers that they were forcing previously with the depth that they had on the roster versus now. Everybody knew it at the under 8 timeout. even though there was a chance for Louisville to get back into the game, the reality of the situation was they were gassed. And Duke was just getting its legs, right? Like Duke was just starting to pick up the pace and just starting to get into, you know, like the crunch time execution. And so while Louisville is completely on a downward trajectory, Duke is just getting into the rhythm of the game. And so I think that, maybe you take the opposite approach. Like maybe Louisville comes in and they run a concerted, more slowed down, more intentional offense, take less risks on defense and get through that first half. And then as you're in the game, then you can speed things up, right? But it can't, to me, it just can't be what we saw against Duke. It just can't because it's not sustainable. You cannot, like, I just don't think that you can play at the pace. It's, the start of the game was a breakneck pace, right? Like it was back and forth. The announcers kept commenting on it, like this is a very helter skelter pace. It favors Louisville based on the way that they wanted to play, based on the roster that was assembled. But you don't have those guys now. You don't have Corin Johnson coming in to spare you. Like that is it. The sixth man of the year in the Pac-12 last year. That is not replaceable. He's gone, right? Like you don't right now. You don't have Kadir Traore, a guy who was a unicorn last year for his team. You don't have Cason Pryor, the guy who was kind of the heart and soul, the competitive fire on this team, a guy that jumps passing lanes, that has game changing dunks and 3-point shots. Like you don't, there's just so much missing from this team that is what made it so valuable. So in my opinion, I think that things have to change. And I understand it's easy to sit here right now, across from each other, Jake, looking at the past and say, okay, that's the obvious solution. But you have to see something different. I mean, in your mind, what else do you see that needs to be changed or that could change?
Yeah, I don't know. I completely agree with you. I think we saw it in that game, just last 8-10 minutes of it. The shooting was just not there at all in the second half. Shot 3 of 15 from three, had a lot of uncharacteristic turnovers as we got towards the end of that game. That's the way Kelsey once played. That's the way we were playing well early on. So it's hard for me to imagine. And I think the other issue with slowing the pace down is that this team is not really a great half court team right now. Like, because if Chucky's not getting it done or if Terrence isn't hitting a difficult shot, like we need to be able to create those open looks, those easier looks within transition or within a steal and then an easier basket that way. I think that team needs this. It just sucks that we can't do it for 40 minutes. We can only do it for 30. So I don't know what it is because I mean, adding Frank in for an extra 5 minutes isn't really going to do anything because Noah Waterman's not is already not playing a ton of minutes as is. So I don't really know where it comes. I think like looking back at this, I know Case and Pryor's a huge loss, probably second biggest loss we could have had outside of Chucky getting hurt. But man, if Corin Johnson were healthy right now, he would help so much. He could spell Chucky for 8-10 minutes a game easily there. And then he could be that offense that you need coming off the bench. So it sucks that the two positions that we're so thin at, guard and then bigs, were the two that we lost our players at. So man, it's difficult. I don't know where it comes. I think this team is still good defensively. I think if we shoot the ball not like we did against Duke in the first half, because we're not a 50% 3-point shooting team, but if we can shoot 35%, above average, then I think we can be competitive. But you're right, that pace is good and bad because I think, like you saw in the first half, it can allow us to get 14-point leads if we're hitting threes and we're playing at a fast pace and we're scoring in transition. But at the same time, if it's a 4-point game with 6 minutes left to go, I'm probably not feeling great about our chances of coming back or maintaining that 6-point lead, 4-point lead.
It's a really difficult situation to put yourself in, and I think that the coaching staff is probably losing sleep over it. Like it's not this isn't we're not saying anything that's breaking news, right? But I think that in the same breath, you can also say that the coaching staff understands that there's no excuses and you have to figure out how to make it work. And so, forgive me if I'm sounding crass or super negative or sounds like I'm coming across as just like a Debbie Downer. I mean, look, and when you look at right now where Louisville is on December 9th, 2024 versus December 9th, 2023, or God forbid 22, right? Like it's night and day. The effort is night and day. what this coaching staff has done to this team is fantastic, right? Like there's no getting around that. There's no circumventing that. The product on the floor, like the coaching staff said, is something to be proud of. And I'm proud to be a Louisville fan. I'm excited for the future of this program. But right now, we're talking about what's the solution. And I mean, to me, I think we've thrown out some really good stuff here, right? Like it needs to be. I think it starts with you need to see improvement from your leaders on this team. Like I think that it starts with no Waterman, and I still think it starts with consistency from Terrence Edwards. Like I think that you brought Terrence Edwards in to be a primary scorer on this team. You brought him in to be a guy that can take somebody off the bounce, that can be super confident, that you can go to in crunch time, that you can go to when you need a basket. And I think that you got to see more of that. And the staff needs to find a way to get the ball in his hands with space. I think that's the other thing, right? Is that he's not a super quick, you know, off the bounce first step type of guy, but he's a guy that's crafty, that can make contested shots, and that's what Louisville's going to need from him for the remaining whatever 18 games, 20 games left in this season, right? Like that's what you have to see going forward. Any other thoughts before we move on to previewing UTEP in Kentucky?
No, I think turnovers. I think that's one thing that we haven't touched on as much. 15 against Duke,
Yeah.
10 in the first half. I mean, if we just turn the ball over at an average rate, like 5 instead of 10 in that first half, we're up 20 at one point against Duke. And like
Mhm.
maybe there's a kill shot there. Maybe it's step on the neck. They're out of it. They stop playing as hard. And we're able
Mhm.
to hold on to that lead. So that really sucked to see. And so many of them were just stupid turnovers. Not like, oh wow, Duke jumped the passing lane. Oh, they trapped right there and forced a steal. Really couldn't do much about that. It would just be dribble off your leg, push Cooper Flag in the face, literally throw the ball to their team, like just silly turnovers. So I think that ideally, if this team, because I don't know if Pat Kelsey really changes the system, if we can continue to play defense at the rate at which we are, we can get to shooting 35% or more, and we can limit our turnovers to 12 or less a game. I think that we're still a competitive ACC team. We're not a top 6, 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. We may not even be a tournament team, but I think
Mhm.
that play style, playing like that, can still have us happy as Louisville fans and not just lose all hope for the rest of the season, which is, I think, my biggest fear because I believe in Pat Kelsey. I think that next year, 5 years down the road, he has his program right where we want to be. I would just hate for so many fans to have started to hope again, started to care again, and then this season just kind of goes down the drain due to injuries. So hoping we can just maintain solid play and maybe be a bubble team that gets in the tournament, or at least is a above 500 team in the ACC. We have something positive going into next year.
I mean, look, I think that just to kind of leave it, where we kind of stand with Duke and with the schedule so far. I mean, look, I don't think you can name 10 teams in the country that have played a tougher schedule than Louisville has thus far. With that being said, though, they have squandered opportunities to have really solid resume wins, and that's what concerns me because you're finishing out December basically with a 7-man rotation, and then hopefully you bring back a healthy and you know a formidable Kadir Traore, a guy playing at least 80 to 90% himself. I think that's huge. But as you get into January and February, the schedule eases up a lot. But that also means that the need to win goes from wow, that would be really nice to spring an upset like that, or that'd be really nice to have a solid top 25 win to like you have to win this game or else you're on the brink of the season collapsing, right? Like when you're playing some of the bottom half teams in the ACC, that becomes not only can should you win, you have to win if you want to get into the tournament. So I think that's something that I try to remain cognizant of is you're trying to build a resume for the NCAA tournament. You had a team in Duke that would be a fantastic win, a signature win for Pat Kelsey, a win that could sell tickets for the rest of the season and bring a ton of attention to the program. Right? You had that in your grasps, and you let that slip away. And I think that if you don't learn from that, you are kind of forced to sit in the same sort of results probably 5, 6, 7 more times this season. And with Kentucky on the horizon, you have to figure out how to correct that right away. And so that's kind of where I stand now is, I think that there needs to be an adjustment. I think there will be adjustments. And I think that you could see a different team 2 or 3 weeks from now than you do right now, which is exciting because it's good to know that we have a coaching staff that is capable of making those adjustments and that is going to not sleep until those adjustments are made. I think that's a huge component of it. Another huge thing for us as we head into the break. Louisville basketball is in full swing, and we are officially locked in on basketball like it's midseason because it basically is almost. That's why our team at State of Louisville and Starting 502, myself and thousands of others are using Underdog Fantasy. Underdog is the best place to cash in all your takes this basketball season. Which players are going off? Which ones are ice cold? You make your picks in just a few taps and turn your sports opinions into real money. It's super easy. You can win up to 1,000 times your money just by choosing higher or lower on player stats like points, blocks, steals, and much more. Not to mention, Underdogs offers great games and rewards as you bet. With Underdog Rescues, you can get your money back and receive a promo if an early injury causes your entry to lose, which still blows my mind, and it is a fantastic setup way to do that. Mm-hmm. This week, did we come up with any picks on Underdog for this week, Jake?
Yeah, I just did one for Tuesday. Tomorrow night, Illinois takes on Wisconsin at home. So it'll be a big game, be a fun game to watch.
It will.
Ben Hummerkaus, who at one time we would have loved to have been a Cardinal, and at this point definitely would still love him to have been a Cardinal.
Yes.
Over 1.53s made in this game. He's hit that in 6 of the last 8 games, or 6 of their 8 games this season. So I think that should be a pretty, not a guarantee, but as close to you can get with that. Especially it'll be competitive. He'll play a lot of minutes.
And you're going to play that on Underdog, which is the best place to play Pick'em. So sign up and deposit using promo code STARTING5. That's all one word, starting FIVE, to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Not to mention, Underdog will be running specials, promos, and bonuses almost every single day, including profit boosts, discounts, free picks, and much, much more. Higher or lower, you make the call on Underdog. Must be 18 plus or 19 plus in Alabama, Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply, void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER and visit www.npcgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. That's 1-800-639-8783 or text next step to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. On the other side, we are going to dive into the team up the road, Kentucky. How huge would it be, Jake, if Louisville could spring an upset? But Kentucky is damn good. We're going to dive into that. We'll talk a little UTEP and get into potentially the biggest recruit Louisville could ever land. How about that? All that and more on the other side.
Mr. and Mrs. is for everyone, from a more traditional 90 proof to a cash string that's smoother than 2013 Russ going to the hole, and boy, could we use that right now. Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon covers tastes, all different taste and preferences, 6 different bourbons that they're offering. Be among the first to try Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon, the official bourbon of the State of Louisville and the Starting 502 podcast, on shelves anywhere you find your liquor, and now online at Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon.com.
Jake, what a break. That was a fantastic commercial break, and we are so thankful for our sponsors. So thankful. Jake, we have something big to talk about. Okay? Because this guy, the name Brown has been big for Louisville recently. Talking Isaac Brown. I'm talking, there's another Brown out there. What's the other Brown that I'm thinking of? Well, I mean, we had a bunch of running backs named Brown that were fantastic.
Kewan
Brown was fantastic. Gonna miss him. RIP, portal transfer. But the biggest Brown to date is Mikel Brown. Are we going with Mikel? Have we decided on that?
Yeah, like I told you, I watched a documentary that he had like freshman, sophomore year of high school. He says, "Hi, I am Mikel Brown." So I've heard people call it the other way, but that would be weird if he doesn't know how to pronounce his own name.
Our sources are saying that his name is Mikel Brown. Sources. Anyways, Mikel Brown, the number one, well, by some services, some say number two, but number one, essentially, for all intents and purposes, point guard in the 2025 class, which means that he would be signing and coming to play for Louisville next season. If you're listening to this, he could already be committed to Louisville. And how huge would this be, right? Like, how massive would this be? That, I mean, look, Louisville brought in a guy in Chris Mack that did a pretty solid job in recruiting. Like, I'd say the talent, the skill level out of high school that he brought in was maybe like a slight step up from Rick Pitino, right? Like the classes that he was putting together were really solid. You brought in Kenny Payne, and he was billed as this, huge name recruiter. Like, he's going to have the number one class every year. He's gonna bring in classes like John Calipari, one and done Central, yada yada yada. And he brought in, no shade, Karan Davis, right? Like, that's what we said. That's what we saw during the Kenny Payne era. And
almost
then
had Trenton Flowers.
Almost had Trenton Flowers. So give him his flowers there. But no, I mean, the Kenny Payne era was an unmitigated disaster from start to finish, and that included recruiting. I mean, let's be honest here. The players that he brought in were nothing compared to what we thought that he'd bring in, right? And so then you bring in Pat Kelsey, and people say, okay, well, this is definitely like a player developer, a guy that's going to bring in like some maybe top 25 classes, maybe some good recruits out of the portal, something like that. All he does is go out and get the number one portal class last year, which granted, he had a lot more than other teams running it, but still, fantastic portal class. If he goes out and gets the number one point guard in the country, who would be one of the top 3 rated players of all time to commit to, and probably the number one player of all time to commit and play at Louisville, that's a huge thing around these parts. Just because you're
Sebastian
committing
Telfair,
and
we're looking at
signing,
you.
looking at a lot of people, unfortunately. Looking at old boy that got Patino in trouble. I cannot think of his name.
Oh, Brian Bowen.
Brian Bowen.
Yeah.
Looking at a lot of guys, right? Like, that's been the story of Louisville basketball. Is this has never been a place for the number one point guard in the class to come in and be uber successful, right? Like, this is standard setting. Like, this is next level. And this is a player that's been so important that you're seeing guys like Donovan Mitchell, brought in to kind of recruit him. You're seeing guys like an Edgar Sosa chiming in, chipping in, trying to help get a commit like this to campus. He's an Adidas guy, which is huge. He's a guy that is a potential one and done. And it's a guy that could immediately vault this roster into, a top 25 preseason type of roster heading into next season. So, Jake, I know we talked quite a bit about Mikel Brown, mostly over the summer, but as we are nearing a commitment, as we're nearing this becoming more and more real, what are your thoughts on this guy? And tell people that say somebody just, is just getting into his recruitment and just finding out who this guy is. Tell us a little bit more about what he would bring to the table.
I mean, he is everything he is billed to be. He is one of the most talented high school guards I think I've watched play. He was tiny. He was a little tiny human being balling out against some of the best players in the nation like 2-3 years ago. Like 5'7", looked like a little kid out there. Hit a growing spurt, I want to say in the last 2 years. He got 6'1", now he's 6'3". And I mean, you can just tell, like, those guys, like the way Anthony Davis's story used to be, oh, he was tiny, that's why he has so many guard skills and he got so big, he's good now. He didn't grow to be 7 foot like Anthony Davis, but he is now 6'3", a legitimate NBA size point guard. I mean, he's got incredible handle, great pace of the ball, really solid jumper, great court vision, and every finish that you want. He was a 50-40, I think 90, 50-40, 80. Yeah, sorry, 45, 40, 90 guy in the Adidas AAU thing. He is everything you want. I think if there's anything that you want to nitpick on, he's not the most elite athlete I've ever seen. Like if you watch Tyron Stokes play, he is just a fucking freak. Like dominates dudes, has been dominating dudes since he was 15. Mikel Brown is not that, but his talent and his skill are just at the top, the highest that you could possibly expect. There is a reason why he is a consensus top 10 player and some consider the best point guard in this class. And I think he would fit in perfectly with this Pat Kelsey system.
Yeah, I mean, there's this thing when I was growing up, right? My dad wanted to get me a nice set of golf clubs, nicer, right? Like more than just what you get out of the box. Like, really want this kid to get into golf, really want him to be, excited about it and get him something, that he'd really want to use. And we go into the store, talk to the guy, and the guy's like, look, he's a kid. You put whatever in his hands, he'll figure it out, right? And that's Mikel Brown. Like it didn't matter what his athleticism or his natural gifts were coming up. He is clearly a guy that turned himself into the player that he is, and now he has the requisite size and athleticism to kind of match that. Like you said, he doesn't have that like jump out of the building ability, but he does. He's got that ball on a string, right? Like he has fantastic handles. He's a fantastic distributor of the ball. He has all the passes in his arsenal. He has all of the the requisite needed skill sets of an ACC point guard, right? And excuse me for burping in here, Jake. And
I liked it.
do it again. Yeah, I mean, I've seen where he's listed as big as 6'4" with a 6'6" wingspan, right? So like he is he has a true NBA size at point guard, right? But he has a skill set that is far advanced compared to his peers. And I think that's why you see him rated as highly as he is. If you look at 247, Adam Finkelstein, director of scouting, Brown made him a name for himself as a diminutive but extremely skilled young guard. In recent years, though, he's sprouted up to 6'3", simultaneously embracing being a true point guard, taking his game to new levels. He remains exceptionally skilled. In fact, there isn't much he can't do with the ball in his hands. He has a total control of his handle as both creator and a distributor, and a terrific left hand. He's a talented passer with excellent floor vision and capable of hitting all corners of the court. He can throw pinpoint cross-court skip passes with both hands, zip in the pocket passes out of the dribble, and make all other associated pick and roll reads with good timing. Brown also has very natural pace and appears to possess a real intellect for the game as well, picking up and implementing concepts quickly. We've also seen more consistent two-way engagement as of late with a matured motor and overall approach. He is listed as having a 6'6" wingspan as of July of this year. Again, a guy that's continuing to grow. And look, I mean, there's no other way to say it other than this would be probably the biggest singular moment of the Pat Kelsey era because it has become so important, in modern college basketball to have guys. If you really like, if you really want to be a championship contender, you have to have a guy or two like this on your team. A guy that they're just straight up, they're just better. They are just a better player than everybody else on the floor. And Louisville, I mean, like, look, Chucky Hepburn is pretty damn close to being that, right? Like, I think that he's probably the best, most dominant player on both ends of the floor that Louisville's had since Carly Jones. But overall, I mean, we're talking about a guy that is incredibly skilled, that has what it takes to come in as a true freshman, lead this offense, be a guy that's rising on NBA draft boards. I mean, I mean, as we're piecing this roster together, right? So when you look at guys that we're pretty sure are going to return next season, what does that look like? I mean, you have, who stands out to you as a guy that's returning? I mean, I know we have James Scott coming in or coming back probably. You have the two red shirts in
Kobe Rogers and Ali Khalifa.
Thank you. Kobe Rogers, Ali Khalifa. And then obviously you have Corin Johnson returning from injury. So if you have Kobe Rogers, you have Corin Johnson, and then you have Mikel Brown, that is a fantastic back or backcourt that, I mean, you can build the rest of the roster around that next season.
Yeah, that's what Pat Kelsey wants, and I think needs is it needs to be a guard dominant, guard oriented roster.
Right.
Bigs that are more than one dimensional, bigs that can shoot, have some versatility in their game, I think are huge. And like above average wings or just 3-and-D wings, I think like that's the perfect way to build this team. It also, just quick aside, can Kason Pryor come back again? He only played 6 games.
I would assume so. He meets the requirements.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I think the other question, right, is does he fit on the roster? Does Louisville have the money in the arsenal to make that happen? Does he want to come back? I think all those things are still yet to be answered. But could he potentially have a spot on next year's team? I think absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, you return. So you got Kobe Rogers, Mikel Brown, Corin Johnson as your 3 guards. You're going to return James Scott. You're going to return Ali Khalifa. So that's 5 right there. Let's say we do have Kason come back. That's 6 right there. I mean, that's a core 6 that I would feel very, very confident in.
And then Kenai Roots, right?
Oh, Kenai Roots. Thank you. Yeah, core 7.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so, I mean, right there, you're looking at it's crazy to talk about because all of those guys except for 2 all those guys except for 1 are on the roster. And none of those guys really play except for what am I blanking again?
Kenai
and James. Sorry.
Yeah.
We're throwing so many names out there. But yeah, I mean, what a great foundation. And then from there, you just come in and you find the supplemental pieces, and then you have what sets up to be a really, really quality roster next season. I mean, if you have 3 guards that are skilled like that, I mean, Kobe Rogers was really coming into his own before his injury in the NCAA tournament last season. You have Mikel Brown, a guy whose ceiling is the roof, and then you have a guy like Corin Johnson. Last year was the Pac-12 Player of the Year, and really was starting to prove himself as a guy that was going to be a really consistent 6-man for Louisville again this season. So I mean, you have a lot of distributors on that roster, and you add in Ali Khalifa as a big man who was probably the best passing big man in the country last season. All of a sudden, you have a team that really distributes the ball well, and really the pieces fit together really well. So you can definitely see what the coaching staff is doing, and Mikel Brown seems to fit like a glove, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. With what you were talking about, the continuity this team would have, I think that was one thing we were afraid of. Is you're bringing in 13 new guys. How are they going to look? How are they going to play together? And I mean, they all bought in. They all gelled incredibly. They all looked like they fit. Not everybody. Terrence has had some struggles at times, but almost all of them have looked like they perfectly understand their role and fit into what this coaching staff wants to do. And if you're able to return, I guess 6, because Mikel would be new as well, but return 6 from that, bring in Mikel, and then just bring in 4 or 5 transfers, I think that's huge for the roster and huge for continuing to see growth as we grow in. And yeah, you're right. I think Mikel Brown fits this team perfectly. If he's got 2 knocks, it's defense is not a huge priority for him, but he's got the wingspan, he's got the height and the length now to be an above average defender. And he's not huge. He's only I think he's listed at 165 one place. He's listed at 175 another place. He's probably 165, 170. He does have a small frame, but that's a fixable thing. And defense, a lot is effort as well. That's a fixable thing as well. So I don't know if there's, I mean, obviously, like AJ DeBasagna or like someone like that, I would love for him to be on Kentucky or on Louisville's team. But like outside of that, I don't know if there's a better fit for what Pat Kelsey needs.
I mean, yeah, I'd be ecstatic for this. And by the time we wake up tomorrow, or by the time you're listening to this, Mikel Brown could be a Cardinal. And just to get him to the finish line, just to get him actually, starting games or, being a serious contributor on this roster would be a huge step forward in landing guys like this, right? Like, and I think that you need to see that happen. You need to see Louisville land him. I don't know if he's going to come in early or anything of that nature. It's not as important in basketball, I guess, but you need to be able to let him develop with the rest of the roster. I mean, I think this could be a win. But
yeah,
any other thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, and it could. I know the the recruiting trail has been kind of dead up until this point. It's left fans wanting more than really getting anything. But I mean, if you land the number one point guard in the nation, how, as any of the other remaining top recruits in this class, are you not looking at that and being like, oh,
Right.
do I want to go play with Mikel Brown? I think I do. Do I want to play in this system that puts up 80 a game, lets us shoot 33s a game, lets us play free? I think I do. Other thing I want to bring up, Elijah Arenas. I don't think we brought him up yet. He reclassed from 2026 to the class of 2025. So this year,
Any important connections that we should know about there, Jake?
I think his dad is a pretty big Louisville women's basketball fan.
That's right. Yeah, that guy. Okay.
Yeah. So Elijah's sister plays for Louisville. She's a freshman this year and is actually playing some pretty consistent minutes.
Cheers.
I've seen a ton of posts with their whole entire family, Elijah included, Gilbert as well, all going to games on the road, at home, and everything. He's already came out and said that his sister being at Louisville and seeing how much he succeeded and enjoyed being at the university has really brought his attention to the team. So, I mean, he was a top 5 guy in the class of 2026. Now he's a top 15 guy in 2025. God, you land those two, and that's crazy. Elijah Arenas is a physical freak. He is nearly as impressive. I think Mikel Brown is obviously more talented, but Elijah Arenas is 6'5" and has NBA level athleticism already as a combo guard, as a junior technically. So if we could land him, and I don't know if we will, because I know Arizona, it's where his dad played. So Arizona's got a very good shot. I know Kentucky's pushing. They've recently offered him in the last week or so. So he'll be a tough guy to try and land, but goodness, if you could, we go from where the hell are we bringing in another 10 transfers to, oh no, we just brought in two top 15 recruits.
Now you bring in those guys and then you hold on to the pieces that you're trying to, kind of build around on this roster. And you've really taken care of any need to, pursue some, actively pursue really high level guys in the transfer portal. I think at that point, and unless for whatever reason you hold on to Case and Pryor, then you're just going after a really high level wing. And then from there, you just find supplemental pieces. So I think next year, obviously, an important factor here is you really have 11 to 13 guys that can absolutely play and will be competing for serious time, right? But ultimately, Pat Kelsey and the staff, they want to play 10, 11, 12 guys. I think that you're looking at with the commitment of Mikel Brown, all of a sudden you're looking at 7 or 8 guys that could potentially be on next year's roster already. And so, there's a lot less work to be done this time around. And you really start to build that continuity and really start to build a team where you can just keep running bodies of guys. One other team that I've been really impressed with, unfortunately, that is running lots of bodies of guys.
Don't ruin the vibes, Press. We were having a fun time dreaming about 2025.
Yeah. We'll continue dreaming about 2025, but when we get back, we want to talk Kentucky basketball. Maybe a little UTEP. But before that, I don't know if you've heard. I guess you can't hear anymore. There's not much clinky clink going on. But as always, sipping on Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon. Mr. and Mrs., as you might know, the official brand of Louisville legend Russ Smith. But what you might not know is that it's becoming a national and global brand, shaking up things in the bourbon industry. Like basketball, bourbon has long been a passion for Russ Smith. Dating back to his college days, he studied and learned under some of the more renowned master distillers in the area. Mr. and Mrs. is more than just a passion project. It's the culmination of a decade of painstaking work. Being among the first to try Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon, the official bourbon of the state of Louisville, and the Starting 502 podcast on shelves anywhere you find your liquor or online at MrandMrsBourbon.com. When we get back, talk a little bit about Kentucky. Don't go away. We're back to talk UTEP basketball, and that's pretty much it, Jake.
Yes,
UTEP.
please.
Everybody have a great night. No, I'm just kidding. Louisville faces what will be, I think, their greatest challenge of the season on Saturday in Kentucky basketball. There's a little break in between, so you might be listening to this on Tuesday or Wednesday, and Louisville's playing UTEP. And look, that's not a game to overlook. They're 150 in Ken Palm, which is not great, but also not. I mean, you can't overlook anybody in college basketball. And as Pat Kelsey will probably remind you, he's losing more sleep over UTEP than he is over Kentucky, right? Like that's the kind of coach speak that we get out of him. Before we get into Kentucky, I guess any thoughts on UTEP? I mean, do we want to run down that? What do you want to see? Like right, like you're coming off of 3 losses against 3 really quality opponents. I mean, let's get that out of the way first. 3 really quality opponents, 3 losses. You suffered attrition across the roster during 2 of those losses, right? So things not going in the direction that you want them, but we've seen a lot of positives as well. But this is much needed. Much needed.
Yes.
You got to have a win here. I mean, if you don't have a win against UTEP, I mean, we're coming back on. We're reevaluating everything, Jake.
Yeah.
Just forget everything we say from here on if you lose to UTEP.
UTEP is a team. Obviously, we should be. I think they're an okay mid-major team, but I don't think they're anything special. They're 6-2. They've played no Power 5 schools. Their best team they played is Utah Valley, and they lost by 30. They also played San Jose State, who's an okay mid-major. They lost by 6. So it's kind of hard to get a read on this UTEP team. I don't think it's really worth us spending a ton of time on. When I was just going over their stats, they have a dude shooting 63% from 3. And I was like, oh, that dude's probably shot like 5 threes on the year or something like that. Nope. He's shooting 4.3 threes per game and he's shooting 63%. So do not let Ahmad Bynum shoot, please. Don't leave him open. As a team, they're also shooting 40%. So they are a good 3-point shooting team. And those mid-majors that can get hot and can shoot well are always a little scary because, I mean, if they shoot 50+% from 3, then they'll probably be able to compete. But overall in this game, let's not get hurt. Please, God. Let's see us continue to shoot well. I think that'll be a big thing to keep guys having confidence so that hopefully that leads us into the UK game, us shooting well. And just maybe see Kanai step up a little bit, maybe have a Noah game. Noah plays a little bit better, get some more confidence going. But yeah, no injuries, shoot well, cover the spread, which I assume will probably be like 16, 17 points. And hopefully lead us into having positive momentum and a little bit of hope going into this UK game.
UTEP, some fun facts. So they're 6-2 on the season. Like you said, Jake, haven't really played anybody. Best win. I mean, what do we say? Best win is definitely Long Beach State.
Yes.
Right? I mean, by name, they beat UC Santa Barbara, who is 124 in Ken Palm. That would technically be their best win. Losses to Utah Valley and San Jose State. Fun facts about UTEP. They're in El Paso, Texas. So if you need a ride to the bowl game and you want to hang around for a little bit, hop on the way home because El Paso is not a place that's easy to get to. For those who don't know, El Paso is in I don't know, not a place I want to live. Let's go with that. It is hotter than hot there, in far west Texas. Ken Palm gives the Miners a 12% chance of winning, which is a bit surprising. But at the same time, I mean, look, Louisville suffered some attrition, as we talked about. He thinks Louisville wins 78-65. Also, something I've never seen on Ken Palm, he gives UTEP a 100% chance of winning a game. Never seen that against Northern New Mexico. So there you go. When Northern New Mexico travels to El Paso, Texas on December 28th, that is a guaranteed loss, according to Ken Palm.
That is insane. Statistically, that should not be put on there.
I think they have to be D2 or I'm not sure what the situation is there, but that's a ring D, so I had to call that out. The Miners play in the Don Haskins Center. You know who Don Haskins is?
I do. He's the guy that Glory Road is, right? He's the coach in Glory Road? Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Taco, nacho, burrito. Yeah, I have a hot doggo. Yeah, that's a great movie. 11,892, 57th largest arena in Division I basketball. Suck it, Duke.
Not much to do in El Paso.
Not much to do there, but they definitely have 11,892 people going to their games. So, no, like you said, I mean, things that stand out on this roster. Ahmad Bynum. Ken Palm has him shooting 59% from the field. I don't know. I suck at math, so I'm not one to judge ESPN or wherever versus Ken Palm. But he has him going 13 for 22 from beyond the arc so far this year. So not shooting a ton, but making a lot, right? So he's a 6'3" junior who has started 6 of UTEP's games so far this season. The depth chart over the past 5 games: David Terrell, the 6'4" sophomore point guard; Devin Barnes, the shooting guard, 6'1", 175. Small forward Corey Camper, 6'5", 185. Otis Frazier is a 6'6" power forward, and then Kevin Kalu, holding it down the middle. So, about all you really need to know about UTEP. I think one thing, we talked about the pace that Louisville plays at. UTEP really likes to slow it down quite a bit. So that means that Louisville, if they don't want to dictate the pace, UTEP is fine with playing a half-court game. So that's something that's interesting, that will be interesting to watch. When you look at, number 3s and 2s taken, they're, pretty low on the spectrum on both of those. Very average rankings across the board statistically. They are the number 1 team in the country in forcing turnovers. How about that?
That's something important to know. We have shown a love to do that recently.
So if there's one thing that you're watching for with this UTEP Miners team from 2 guys that are definitely not qualified to talk too much UTEP Miners, I think the 2 things you're watching for, right? Number 1, 3-point defense. Is UTEP able to keep themselves in this game, or propel themselves forward in this game by shooting it well beyond the arc? Is Louisville's 3-point defense going to be able to circumvent that? And then obviously number 2, is Louisville able to hold on to the ball, right? So it'll be interesting to see how other teams start playing Louisville, knowing that there's not a lot of depth. Like, are they going to start trying to get guys into foul trouble? Are they going to start trying to wear guys down? Both equally very solid strategies. So be interesting to see how a team like UTEP plays Louisville. And if we see other guys get into the game, or are we going to continue the 7-man rotation? Really interesting, sample size here. Really interesting 40 minutes ahead with UTEP. Any other thoughts about the Miners before we get into Kentucky?
No, not too much. Like I said, don't get hurt. Please try and continue this trend of shooting at least at an average rate. Maybe see a little bit of Frank, maybe get him a little bit more confident. But I don't think this UK game is a Frank game. I guess he could be, especially if a big man gets in foul trouble, since they've got those 2 bigs. But yeah, not a whole lot from UTEP. I have not dug too deep into them. I was a little too busy digging into the more important game on Saturday.
So, one thing about the Louisville Kentucky game that has just always been true, no matter who the coaches are, no matter the circumstance, there's almost always some guy that either comes off the bench or that you're just not expecting that performs way above the mean. Always. It doesn't have to consistently be a Kentucky player or a Louisville player. Why not Frank Anselmibe? Let's go. Yeah, go ahead and throw on. See if that's on underdogs on Friday night or Saturday morning. Check your underdog fantasy. See if you can't get Frank Anselmibe
over 0.5 points.
Right. See if you can get Frank in there. In all seriousness, though, as much as it pains me to say this, Kentucky's fucking good. Kentucky's a very good team. They have size. They have athleticism. They have stick-to-itiveness. They have the wherewithal to play within themselves and play their game on this roster, right? Without their starting point guard, and without Kirk Risa, who is now looks like he's going to be out indefinitely for the second half against Gonzaga. Came back from 16 down to beat Gonzaga on Saturday. And so what does that mean for Louisville? That means that this is a very tough test against a coach that does not want to lose to Louisville, and against a team that is going to do everything in their power to do so in an arena where Louisville has never had very much success. The odds are very much stacked against Louisville in this game. If we want to look at the Ken Palm statistics very quickly, as we often do, Ken Palm has Kentucky winning comfortably 83-71, giving Louisville a 15% chance of winning this game. Thoughts on Kentucky? What stands out with this team? How does Louisville beat this team?
Yeah, shooting really well. Shooting really well. That is truly the answer to me. I think if this team puts on a Duke-like performance for two halves instead of just one, I think that's a really good chance for us to win. Tennessee to me is a better team than Kentucky. I also think that we match up better against Kentucky than we do at Tennessee. I think what we've seen that we struggle with is physicality. Teams that get in your face, that bog down your offense, that really don't allow you to have any freedom of movement, which is so necessary in this offense. And that's not really what Kentucky does. Kentucky is an average to above average defensive team, but they are not super, super physical. They've got really good interior players. I think they average like 6 blocks a game. But they're not in your face. They're not making every single movement, every single pass, every single dribble difficult. So I do think that favors us a little bit. And Kentucky, kind of similarly to us, if you can be physical with them, they struggle a little bit more. But overall, man, this Kentucky team is really good. They've got 6 dudes scoring in double figures. I guess 5 with Lamont Butler, assumedly being out. I don't think that's a for sure thing that he's going to be out against Louisville, but assuming that he is, and I think that's a really big deal because he is their point guard. He leads them in assists, their second leading scorer, really solid player overall, really good defender as well. So that would be big if he was out. But I mean, they shoot 36% as a team from 3. They've got 4 dudes shooting above 35% from 3. Kobe Brea just flicks his wrist and makes 3 threes in a game. Dude is shooting 55%. So, and they're the highest scoring team in the nation. I think they've got like their top 30 in field goal percentage, number 6 in fast break points, number 4 in assist turnover ratio. Like they are an amazing offensive team. Defensively, I think they're average to above average, but when you're playing and you're shooting as well as Kentucky has and does, you can get away with being an average to above average team. And I think they reminded me so much of this Louisville team, except for they've got 2 really good big men, and obviously we had one really good big man. We now kind of have 0. But Andrew Carr and Amari Williams. Andrew Carr more offense, Amari Williams more defense, rebounding. But they've got 2 dudes. I think they're both 6'10 plus. Good rebounders. Amari Williams, great defender, good passer as well. Andrew Carr can take in the post, can shoot threes, killed it against Gonzaga. So I think if there's one thing that, at least as the season had started prior to our injuries, I saw us being really similar teams, love to push the pace, want to score 90, 95 points a game, want to shoot a bunch of threes. But Kentucky has the advantage on the inside, and now so even more with a guy like Kason Pryor being out.
Yeah, I mean, so starting with Andrew Carr, right? His game reminds me a lot of our guy from Duke. Why am I not remembering his name?
Is he still there, Filipowski? Or
no,
Cooper Flag or
Cooper Flag? I'm sorry. So I think that Kentucky will use Andrew Carr in a similar manner to Cooper Flag, where they kind of get him posting up a little bit in the low to mid post, kind of getting him in some mismatches. I think that's a guy to really watch out for. A guy that kind of flies under the radar a little bit, but just as a do it all, just fantastic all around players. Otega Owe. Dude is just across the board. Like if you just look across the stats on KenPom, he is top 500 in the country in like 8 stats, right? Like he draws a lot of fouls. He, gets to the line a lot, makes a lot of free throws, doesn't turn the ball over very often. Is a solid shooter, just really just solid, no, frills about him, just all around really good player. The guy, obviously, that a lot of fans are going to be watching is Jackson Robinson, a guy who has had a bit of a journeyman career, but last year really found a home at BYU and then followed Mark Pope over, and he's been fantastic for Kentucky. They have a lot of guys that shoot the ball pretty solidly from deep, but then obviously, like you said, Kobe Brea is their shooting specialist. He started out the season shooting like 75% from 3, I believe. He's now 27 for 49. So he's basically made he's pushing Rain Smith for number of threes made with like 30 less attempts. So a guy that, like you said, a fantastic shooter of the ball. over the last 5 games, Lamont Butler, Otega Owe, Jackson Robinson, Andrew Carr, and Amari Williams have been their starters. As you suggested, we know Kirk Kriisa is definitely out. Lamont Butler sounds like he's day to day. So if he can't go, obviously, like you said, that'd be huge. I think if Lamont Butler can't go, Jake, I think that is what gives Louisville that shot of winning this game. I mean, not to, I know that sounds pessimistic or overly simplistic, but look, if Kentucky is without probably their two best guards, that's huge, right? And then they're asking Jackson Robinson to really shoulder a lot of that load. And then if you can cause foul trouble or if he becomes a bit more turnover prone, something of that nature, that could really set the wheels in motion for Louisville. But yeah, I mean, I think UK has a little bit of an advantage down low, right? Like Amari Williams is listed as their number one contributor, right? So he's a 6'10", 260-pound big. He started all 9 games for them so far this season. He is in the top. He's number 200 in the country in percentage of possessions used, which is, for those keeping track, is pretty high up there. Number 10 in defensive rebounding rate. Number 206 in offensive rebounding rate. So dude's just going to clean up the boards. He blocks a lot of shots, 44th in the country in block percentage rate. So does a lot of things really well. And it's going to be interesting to see how Louisville tries to negate that, right? Like that's huge. That's huge. And so there's a lot that Louisville has to do to try to circumvent what Kentucky does really well. I'm not sure. Like, I don't know if this is a team that you want to get into an up and down, run and gun style of game against. I mean, obviously, that's the style that Pat Kelsey and staff prefer, but Kentucky is going to have a little bit more depth at their disposal than Louisville will, especially if they can get their starting point guard back. So that'll be something that's interesting to watch. But like you said, Jake, like you suggested, the number one thing to know about this Kentucky team, and look, this could change in rivalry games, things change, right? But based on what we know about this Kentucky team, they do not force a lot of turnovers. They're almost dead last in the country in non-steal turnovers forced. So basically, what that means is if they are not stealing the ball at all, right? Like if other teams turn the ball over, it's because they are being lackadaisical with the ball. So I think, like you said, Jake, number one, you have to shoot the ball well against this team. Like they're going to score a lot of points, and you have to be able to keep up. Number two, they got to stay out of foul trouble, which is always difficult in rivalry games. And I mean, I don't know what well you go to, where you draw from, if you get in foul trouble. Like that's just a no brainer. And I don't know if you remember last year's game. Louisville had to turn to everyone's favorite player, the what's his name? Come on, the white guy that Danilo Jovanovic. Do you
Danilo.
remember? Were you there for the D'Lo game when Danilo was just going off? He had like 4 points on those guys, and Louisville had the lead for a significant period of time. I want to say it was like 10-4 at one point. I mean, they were balling. Dudes were balling. And then Kentucky won by like 35. And I took pictures with the guys with bags on their heads. Really fun time. Anyways, um, I think number one, right, like we said, Louisville's got to shoot the ball well. Number two, they have to hold on to and pass the ball well. Something we didn't get into in the first segment that I would have loved to see improve, right? Like when they came out in the offseason Bahamas games, I think the number one thing that stood out to me was how well that team moved the ball. And what do better teams do? They come up and pressure the ball so that you can't just pass it around the perimeter or, just get whatever you want, right? Like teams that were able to prepare, adjusted, and that's something that doesn't happen very often anymore. And what we've seen is that the passes did not get any crisper. In fact, they got more lackadaisical. It got worse. And as time has gone on, we've not seen a lot of two-handed passes. We've not seen a lot of bounce passes. We've not seen a lot of intentionality with the way that this team passes the ball. And that's something that has to improve against Kentucky. There needs to be intentionality with every single pass in that game, period. Every dribble, every pass needs to be intentional, needs to be with a purpose, you need to know where the ball is going next. You need to know what is within the flow of the offense and what's not, right? Like, That's just stuff that you have to know and have to be prepared for. And we've made a significant stretch now against, granted, very quality opponents, where Louisville has gotten. I don't know if it's fatigue. I don't know what it is specifically, but they've gotten pretty lazy with the ball. There's been a lot of just silly, unforced errors and turnovers that led to massive moments in the game. That could not happen against Kentucky. You can't do that at all. Like you got to keep turnovers under 10, maybe 12. 12 is like maxing it out, right? And you got to shoot, I want to say 38+% from deep, like period. If you're going to take 30 to 35 threes like you have been, you got to make, well, I mean, what's the number there? You got to make 13 to 14 of those easily. Like the shots have to be falling. You have to be passing the ball well. You have to be holding on to the ball. And you got to keep up with this team.
Can I give you some bad news?
You don't think that's going to happen?
Kentucky is top 5 in 3-point percentage defense on the year.
Yeah, not great.
Teams are shooting 25.4% from 3, which, I mean, early in the season that can be attributed to just playing teams that just can't shoot. If other teams played Louisville every single game, they would probably also have one of the top 3-point percentage defenses in the nation. But they are
It's sad to hear, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, they are a solid defensive team. They get out on the 3 well, especially because they know they have those 2 defensive-minded bigs in there. They're not afraid to push out maybe a little bit more, close out a little bit harder, because if they do get beat, Amari Williams is there or someone is there in the paint. But I think you're right. I think if you're looking at positives coming in this game, Louisville has struggled with turnovers recently, particularly with post Cason Pryor injury.
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky does not force turnovers. They're 291st in turnovers forced per game. And also they're not as banged up as we are, but they are coming close to as banged up as we are. So not that I'm ever cheering for an injury, but at least from a Louisville fan perspective, that is positive. The playing field is a little bit fair. They don't foul a ton. They don't not foul. They foul 17 times per game. So maybe that's something Louisville can do. I feel like we have done well at drawing fouls over the past few games. But I think you're right. It's just going to come down to which team shoots better. And if you're a betting man, the money should go on UK. But if Louisville can shoot 35, 38, 40%, they can stay in this game. I think we're going to have to see somebody outside of Chucky step up, probably 2 somebodies outside of Chucky step up, because we saw it. Chucky played well, Terrence Edwards played well, and it still wasn't enough against Duke. So we're probably going to have 3 guys total, assuming Chucky gets there, Terrence, and whether it's Kanai or whether it's Javon Hadley or maybe it's a Rain Smith game, he hits 5 threes. We're going to have another guy step up and score and create for this team, because it cannot be Chucky with how fast it can't be Chucky the whole time. With how fast this game is going to be played, and it will be played fast. Kentucky loves to push the pace. He is going to tire down. Someone is going to have to be able to step up in the minutes that he is on the bench and step up and just give him a breather and not have him be everywhere on defense and everything for us on offense.
As Louisville has played better defensive teams, the overall pace of the offense, average possession length, has significantly stretched out. So Louisville was near the very, very tip top to start the season. Post Atlantis, they are 77th in average length of possession. So still in that top quarter. Kentucky, 9th in average length of possession. So what that tells me is, as you suggested, Jake, they're going to want to push the ball. And look, Kentucky has been very, very good against some really quality opponents this year. Like, I mean, we saw Louisville competed with Duke, but ultimately Duke's depth and talent and, mostly those 2 things took over towards the end of the game. Kentucky beat that Duke team after being down by a significant margin. Defeated Duke 77-72. Their only blemish on the record was last Tuesday at Clemson. Very solid Clemson team. We know how hard it can be to win on the road there. They fell 70-66 at Clemson, but then bounced right back, traveled all the way across the country, played Gonzaga 4 days later in what Ken Palm refers to as a semi-away game, 90-89 in overtime. So, with all that in mind, Kentucky is just as battle tested as Louisville, and they've been very impressive this year. I was not super bullish on this Kentucky team. Like, I just try to be as transparent as possible and honest with myself about how good Kentucky is. This is a quality squad. Is it as good as like the early years of John Calipari? I'm not sure, but it's kind of different. It's like, comparing apples to, you know, concrete mix. Like, it's just very different, right? But overall, I'd say that this is a team that could very well be a top three seed in the NCAA tournament. They're going to compete for an SEC title. Louisville pulling a win over Kentucky at this juncture in the season. I mean, it's hard to understate how massive that would be.
Huge.
I don't think you can understate it, right? Like, and I think that Louisville's going to go into this game. I want to guess that they're going to be 8 to 10 point underdogs at least.
I was going to say more, honestly.
I mean, look, people that are in the know, people the sports books, they're gonna understand the significance of Louisville's players being out. I'm interested to see what happens though if Kentucky doesn't have Lamont Butler. I mean, that's a huge factor. So as we're preparing for this game, as we're entering this, as we're entering this Louisville Kentucky matchup, I think that's a massive thing to look at. Is Lamont Butler being there completely changes the complexion of this game. I really like the thought of Chucky Hepburn versus Jackson. Why am I forgetting his last name?
Robinson.
Thank you. Jackson Robinson versus Chucky Hepburn. I would take that all day. Lamont Butler, completely different story, right? Like, that's one of the better point guards in the country. So,
Yeah.
Jake, any final thoughts before we get out of here? This has been a long one.
I want my dog to stop trying to get this toy that she's been squeaking and put me on mute the whole entire time.
That's the asshole life, baby.
I know. You can have it in 2 minutes. I think big thing, we've talked about it, but Louisville has to be able to shoot threes. If they don't shoot threes, we're not winning this game. And I think that's true
Period.
for most of this season, but especially against good teams like Kentucky, Duke, North
Right.
Carolina, even though I don't think North Carolina is that great. They're going to have to shoot threes. We're going to have to not get killed on the glass. I think they are like they're top 15 in the nation in rebound margin. They average. Good Lord. Can you still hear me?
Yeah,
My dog just tackled.
That was fantastic.
My dog just tackled the freaking the computer and the desk that I'm sitting it on. But they're going to have to not get dominated on the boards. Kentucky's averaging like a +7 positive rebound margin. And I think that if that continues, if that goes this way, Louisville probably doesn't stand much of a chance. And I think one thing that we saw, because Clemson's not that talented of a team, but they were super, super physical with Kentucky, and it affected them. And I think the home court advantage also affected them, and we don't have that in this game. And I don't think we're a super physical team. I think on the perimeter we're somewhat physical, but down low we're not super physical. But if Pat Kelsey can see that and get us to be a little bit more physical, play a little bit more physical on the defensive end, I think that gives us somewhat of an advantage. And you see that's how you beat this Kentucky team, is just get up in their shit.
In a rivalry game, I think there is some sparring that happens to start, right? Like,
dude, if Kirk Harissa and Kason Pryor were in this game, they would have been 100% double technical within the first 6 minutes of the game.
Right. And yeah, that was one thing that I had on my list to bring up, right? Is the fact that you don't have the two shit stirrers. And I thought that might be Noah Waterman. I don't see that being the case. I think he's much more docile than I expected. I expected him to be like kind of a bully, and it's just not really his game. Like, he's just pretty level headed, it seems like. But no, I think that one thing that you'll see is there's a feeling out process, right? Like, rivalry game, the officials are prepared for this to be physical. They're prepared for people to not be level headed, right? And so is this going to be something where we come out the gates and there's fouls being called left and right? Because with the lack of depth in this game on both sides, that could be a huge factor, right? Like, I mean, what do you do? What do you do if Chucky Hepburn gets 3 fouls in the first half? I mean, I don't know. I don't think there's an answer to that. I think you just play him until the wheels fall off, right?
Yeah, you have to.
So, I mean, there's stuff like that to take into consideration that is terrifying. I think this is a game that I could see it being a blowout in Kentucky's favor. I think if Louisville wins, it's going to be a close one. I think the only way that Louisville wins is they come out shooting hot, they sustain a lead, and then they just don't let Kentucky creep back into it. Because what we've seen in Kentucky's two massive wins against Duke and Gonzaga is they fell down to massive deficits. And I think most people that are college basketball fans naturally are like, Kentucky doesn't quite have it yet. Understandable. And then they just absolutely pulled like just fantastic performances on both ends of the ball out of their asses in the second half. And I think that's something you could see again with Louisville, right? Like I think that this is a game where Louisville could go into into the half leading, especially if they come out shooting the ball well, and you just see Kentucky creeping back in, and I think that you know, you got to figure out a way to manage a game like this with the lack of depth. And that's what concerns me the most because Kentucky's going to push the pace. There's going to be a sense of physicality. I think the refs will call it close. And with that in mind, I mean, that's where we talk about why other players need to step up. And I mean, is this a game where Rain Smith just takes like 16 threes? Possibly. Like I'm dead serious. Like, I mean, if he can come out and hit like 4 or 5 threes in the first half, and then just kind of open things up for everybody else. Is this a game where Noah Waterman finally steps up? Is this a game where, James Scott matches the physicality of the opposing bigs? There's a lot of possibilities, but I think ultimately you're going to see a guy like Kanai Ruths or somebody that's going to have to step up and really make a name for themselves because this is a game where players make their names, make their careers, right? Like Edgar Sosa for all the shit that Edgar Sosa has gotten over his career, no matter what, everybody looks back. And one of the 3 moments that they think about with Edgar Sosa is him hitting that shot against Kentucky. Nobody thinks about the fact that Louisville choked it away and then he had to come down the court and make a three at the end. Nobody thinks about everybody being pissed off about Edgar Sosa for X, Y, and Z throughout his career. They think about that shot, and it's the same, go down the list, right? Like Josh Harrelson. Nobody thinks about how little used Josh Harrelson was in his career. They think about how clutch he was down the stretch against Louisville. Like this is a game where players make their name, and I think that Louisville absolutely has that opportunity. I think that that player could be Kanai Reese. That's my prediction, Jake. I don't even. I hesitate. I hesitate to get score predictions because I think there's so much that we don't know that we'll find out in the next few days. But thoughts about just weird, wild predictions because anything goes in this game.
I think if it's anybody, I think it's Rain Smith. I think this is the game where Rain Smith hits 8 threes. Like if you want me to give a bold prediction, like Rain Smith shoots 8 for 12 from 3 or just something crazy. And that's the way Louisville wins this game. I think Louisville probably come in as probably like a 12-4. I bet probably like 12-point underdog if I had to guess. I think they've got a great chance to. I don't see us getting blown out. I mean, it's obviously possible. UK shoots amazing and we just shoot terribly, but I think we're two teams that play similar styles of basketball. UK is not that super physical team that's going to really affect our offense. I think it'll be back and forth, probably like 80s for both of us, maybe even 90s for both of us with the pace and the shooting that we want to both play at. So I think it'll be a close one. I would still predict UK to win the game, but I do think with the injuries they sustained, it'll be a little bit closer than I would have said a week ago, just after the case in prior injury and just after us losing by 20 to Ole Miss.
Yeah. I think no matter how you kind of position the game or what methodology goes into it, I don't see Louisville coming out with a victory unless some very radical things happen, right? Like if you don't see Lamont Butler play and basically both teams are just playing with one bona fide point guard, or you see a player get into foul trouble or there's an injury or something just crazy happens, I see Kentucky pulling away in this one. I do think it's closer than the experts think. I think that because number one, it's a rivalry game. Number two, I think that this game means a lot to both of these coaches. And I think that, I don't know, there's just something about this game that it doesn't feel like a blowout, but it does feel like Kentucky has the substantial upper hand, if that makes sense. So that's what we'll go with for now. It's been way too long, Jake. But it's been a good, needed, healthy conversation. I appreciate it. Press Meyer on Twitter, at State of Lou, at UVL_updates. Until next time, let's get out of here and go Cards.
Go Cards.